The Campbell Group has teamed up with PI Perspectives to offer listeners top-notch, affordable insurance solutions. Private investigators can get insurance for their business for as low as $305 per year. Apply now at piperspectivesinsurance.com and receive a quote back within 24 hours. Do you enjoy our podcast and the guests we bring you? Since 2019, Matt and his team have done their very best to give you amazing shows each week. If you feel like our show has helped you to be a better investigator, or maybe even inspired you to become an investigator, please let us know. We're looking for testimonials. Drop Matt an email with a recorded 20 to 30 seconds of you talking about this podcast. You can also email him something verbal about the website. His email is matthew.s@satellitepi.com. And if you really feel blessed for having this content, consider supporting Matt and our show by joining Investigator's Toolbox. You really have to see version 2.0. And at just 49 cents a day, it's a no-brainer. Now let's jump in to this week's episode. Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman are back with a collection of authors for The Art of Investigation Revisited. This second edition features all new content, and it's a great look into the skill set that's needed to be an investigative professional. Are you interested in becoming an investigator or getting better at your trade? This is the book for you. Available in paperback, hardcover, or via ebook. Just search out the title, The Art of Investigation Revisited. Over the past year, our industry has been the target of foreign governments and agencies that have attempted to recruit unsuspecting investigators to gather intelligence or immediate expatriates. PI Perspectives is teaming up with the Federal Bureau of Investigations to get the word out about this ongoing crisis. If you've been contacted by an individual or company that might seem suspicious, please contact the FBI at tips.fbi.gov. You can also contact the New York field office at 212-384-1000 to report suspicious activity in any state. The link is also in the show notes. Even if you completed a job and it still doesn't sit right with you, you can report this activity. The only way to stop this trend is to work together. So let's do it. Welcome to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Hey, are you listening or watching this program on YouTube? Go ahead and hit follow if you are. Last week, we gained over half the followers we need to get it over 1K. Help Matt and his team pass this important goal. Now back to our program. Today is a special show. We start a 3-part series focusing on the art of investigation revisited. This is the second volume of an amazing collection of investigators who each write a chapter on the characteristics it takes to be a successful investigative professional. The book is the brainchild of Dr. Chelsea Binns from John Jay College of Criminal Justice and celebrated investigator Bruce Sackman. On each show, we will focus on several of the chapter writers. Please welcome our first guest, Amber Schroader, and your host, private investigator Matt Spaier.
And welcome to this week's episode of PI Perspectives. Today we are doing a highlight of The Art of Investigation Volume 2, which is a collection of amazing investigators who were given the task of writing on a specific topic. This is a vehicle that Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman started a few years ago, and now we're on Volume 2 here. And today I am honored and really excited to talk to a good friend of mine, Amber Schroader from Parabon. Amber, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to see you. So you, for those who don't know, you are the founder, owner, CEO, top dog over at Parabon. Tell folks a little bit what Parabon does and what you guys are about.
Well, Parabon is a digital investigation technology company. So we're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary this year.
Wow.
So we have been making tech to be able to kind of deep dive into anything from smartphones to IoT to computers to OSINT automation, different things like that. We've been doing that for a while now. I have my nerd glasses on, which says I've sat in front of a computer too long.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty amazing over the 25 years how technology has changed and what you've seen. I'm curious how many versions, how many rollouts you've had of investigative tools.
It's
That you
been
guys do.
crazy. It's gone through so many different names. It's almost a little bit nutty. I have people coming back to me and they're like, I had it back when it was PDA seizure. And I'm like, nobody even has a PDA anymore.
Yeah,
And now I'm into an integrated platform. I'm on version 4 of that. So it's like, I could not keep track, but I've definitely evolved through the years.
sure.
Logo changes, tech changes. This morning, I actually cloned my own voice with AI. So
Nice.
who would have thought?
Am I really talking to you? That's the
I know.
question.
It's really me. We can tell by my lovely blur
You sure
background.
about that? Can I see your driver's license, please? That's crazy. It is pretty amazing though how technology has changed and how Paraben has kind of stayed on top of that. I think you guys like brand recognition. I mean, folks know that if you're in that space and this is the type of work, investigative work that you're doing, it's like first stop. All right, workshops. We got to go to Paraben. We got to learn what we're doing, and we got to do that continuing education, stay on top of things, right?
Oh, I'm all about that. I think one of the biggest things is there's a lot of shift with technology. So a lot of times you don't see the same company over and over again. And someone the other day is like, "Hey, this is crazy that you're still there." I'm like, "Well, one, I own the company, so yes, I'm still here." But
Still alive.
two, I said, "We love what we do.
Yeah.
When you really love it, you're more, I guess, selective. It's like, okay, I could go the normal technology path like many companies do, but it's like,
Mhm.
I love the space. I love digital investigations. I love the fact that everything we do makes a difference in someone's life one way or another. It brings out truth.
Sure. So what's the kind of latest thing that you're seeing now? What are the trends in the past 2 or 3 months that you guys are keeping your eye on?
Well, besides, of course, the rise of the AI, I'm seriously just waiting for a Terminator to like come across my
Skynet.
backyard and be
Yeah,
like,
coming.
Skynet is here, and it belongs to Meta or it belongs to Google
Yeah.
or Amazon. You never know.
If your name
Uh,
is John Connor or Sarah Connor, I'd be
it's like
really concerned.
I would be worried right now if you were named after them. I'd be like, okay, I'm a little concerned this is going to happen now.
Sure.
So the rise of the AI has been interesting. I think people trying to use it in investigations has been a little different because they aren't realizing they have to teach it. It's almost like you
Sure.
decided to adopt a kid and now I got to teach it how to think and how to do these things. I don't think it replaces any of us investigators. I think it
Sure.
simply gives us a new perspective without a human. So there's
Yeah.
that side.
Yeah.
The other thing is actually you're gonna laugh, but Timu or Temu, because I learned in the Super Bowl commercial, I've been saying it wrong the whole
Yeah.
time.
Shame
I
on
was
you.
like, oh, who would have thought? They have brought a new edge to IoT because they made it mega cheap. You
Okay.
can buy a doorbell camera for them from them for like $4 and they
Wow.
ship it for free and it's in a week. And so a lot more people in the masses are adopting IoT technology than did before.
Okay, so where are they storing all that data? I feel like it's give it to them
Yes,
cheap and
that
create this mega database.
that's exactly what's happening. I'm
Yep.
doing a whole series on I'm going to keep calling it Timu just because I think it sounds cooler. They should
Sure.
change. But I'm doing a whole series on just what their devices are doing in IoT and what their collection is because again, cheap tech. I bought a drone for $13. And
Sure.
I was like, it's a decent drone. It will fly, it will record, it will do all of that. But I'm like, what are your options? Where are you taking it? Where
Yeah.
is your cloud? Because I can tell you there's no documentation that comes with it. That was extra.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was an extra $20 just to get the docs.
Sounds a little suspicious. And yeah, we can call it Timu. That sounds very Star Trekky.
It
So
did. That's why I liked it better
we're gonna roll
too.
with that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure billionaires don't shop there, but
Yeah. Yeah.
who am I to say?
Yeah, it's crazy. And it ties in so great with your chapter. Adaptability is what you wrote about. And that's your career, essentially. 25 years of adaptability.
Oh, very
So
much
how did
is.
you like attack this chapter? What was your thought process in writing it?
So one of the things that I did when I looked at the adaptability chapter is I always like to make sure that people realize when they read a book, they're like, everyone in here must be brilliant. We must all be like doctorates and everything else. And we're not. I'm a dyslexic person that found digital investigations clicked in my brain.
Right.
And that was part of that adaptability was finding a field and interests that really matched the way that I thought. And it's hard when you grow up and you're like, okay, so I'm looking at this book and I have to read it for class. And let me tell you, the Crucible, that was brutal
Yeah.
trying to read that in high school. And I'm like, please let me pass this class. Please
What
let
does
me pass
goody
this
mean? I'm
class.
still trying to figure that
I,
out.
I'm like, I don't know. I don't see all this. It took me 5 times reading the same chapter over and over again.
Yeah.
And math was a totally different story. I actually transposed numbers naturally.
Right.
So those things made it so when I first started in my career, I worked at a company that did cryptography and
Mhm.
they did password recovery. And my dyslexia actually gave me a different perspective to getting into files and breaking into different passwords from the way that I looked at it versus a brilliant mathematician who was the owner of the company. I looked at it with a simpler backwards mind, and it actually got into quite a few different cases because of it.
That's interesting. That's really, really interesting, right? You just looking at a different perspective of things. Wow.
Yeah, I think that's what adaptability is all about because, I'm a digital forensic person, but I also do OSINT. But
Right.
because I'm a nerd, I do OSINT differently than some of the other OSINT people do. And so I bring a different perspective into it and I adapt to that different environment and putting those restrictions of what I'm looking at when I look at open source versus what I look at with the residual data.
Mhm.
And I think that's another trend that's going to change right now is the world of open source, the terms of open source, and that's going to change big time in this next year.
How do you think? In what way?
I don't think because we're adapting the privacy standards that a lot of the rest of the world has done, a lot of what we have considered open in the past, a lot of it is closing it.
Yeah.
You're having to change the doors. You're going to have a lot more obscurity of the information, definitely a lot more. I don't know how many levels of authentication I can do. I was signing up for a system I have set up with my business, and they're like, we want 3-factor authentication. I'm like, good gracious, are we going to get all the way up to DNA at a certain point? And this
Exactly.
is how
We
I'm
need
like,
a phone call
it's
from your
for
mother.
sure me. But after cloning my voice this morning, I was
Yeah.
like, holy crap, we might need to get to
We
this
need that.
level.
Right.
This is going to be a big deal. So I do think our open side of life is going to change pretty dramatically over the next 12 months to 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you talk about GDPR and things like that. Like this is real, the whole trust but verify taking on a whole new meaning.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think Reagan wanted it to be a little simpler.
Yeah, we've definitely got a lot more complex with this.
Yeah,
100%.
a little more difficult, but it's necessary, right? As these things happen. I mean, especially when you're talking on evidence, right?
Yeah.
Something that's evidentiary that's basically could just decide an outcome one way or the other. Being able to authenticate an image or a voice or a piece of data. I mean,
yeah. Is it
it's a game changer.
legitimately coming from me or not? I mean, there's the whole argument as, people write up plans and do all of that. It's like how much of that was legitimately typed out by me? I mean, we're talking about a book here, and I legitimately typed everything that was into my chapter. It was my research, my information. But now, I bet you I could go to ChatGPT and write an entire chapter about about adaptability, and it would be done in like 30 seconds. I'm like, that took me way longer.
Yeah.
I'm like, hang on a second. That's all going to change for how we have a perspective of the content of it and that authenticity that comes with that content.
Sure. So like, what is one thing that you would want the reader to take away from your chapter? If there's one nugget that's in there that you think is super, super important, what would that be?
I think it's about perspective and to not discount when you hear that little voice in your head. I'm sure you've had this in your investigations where you start going down a rabbit hole and you're like, wait a second, am I going way too far? It's like, let yourself go for a little bit, because that is going to give you to another extreme perspective that might bring you back to the center of what you're actually looking for, just in a different way. There's a whole thing, it's called ad absurdum logic. And you go to each extreme end of a problem, and then what those are. And that's what brings you into the middle of what the actual solution may be.
Yeah, I mean that theory is kind of what they push in law school. Like when you're studying to be a lawyer, the whole contrapositive of considering every alternate possibility of how something happened and essentially ruling it out.
I did not know that. See, I just
Yeah.
learned something new. I
Yeah.
knew I should have been a lawyer. Oh,
I almost was. I started going down that route, and
I wanted to growing up. I just I didn't have the financial backing to make a lawyer happen.
yeah, for me, it was the pressure of being a certain age, because I later in life I considered doing it, and then knowing that I wanted to buy a house and have a family and all that, and having that big, debt, for my
Yeah. You're like, no, again, a financial choice there.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
No.
it's funny because like all my clients are lawyers and they're all friends of mine, and they're like, you made the right decision. Like,
Okay, that makes me feel better
lawyer.
too. I
Yeah.
feel I can definitely make a higher impact
Yeah.
making technology for people to fight for justice than I probably could as a lawyer.
Sure. I started studying, and then, the adaptability said, don't do this, do something else.
You want a different type of life. Don't pick and
Yeah.
choose.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I wanted to be in the law, but not a lawyer. So
But not
yeah.
deep in there. Nope,
Deep in
that
there.
absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. And it's good. Like these tools, these skills, and you can talk about technology and the, latest and greatest pumpkin that's out there. And I'm saying pumpkin because it's orange and that's paraben, and that's
Sure.
how we do things, right? Yeah, you can talk about the latest and greatest toy that's out there. But, when it comes to the success of the adaptability is using the right skill set, right? The methodology of how you do things. And I think that's something that's really, really important, because the toys are always going to change.
The toys will change. I learned my initial, I think, adaptability when I was a little kid. And I actually wrote this into the chapter, but I had to share a room with my sister, which is like the worst thing on the planet because we're very different individuals.
Yeah.
And we have very different personalities. And she was messier and I'm OCD.
Yeah.
So man, my brain hated it so much. It was ridiculous.
How close are you guys in age?
We're 2 years difference in age. But I grew up in an apartment, so there was only 2 bedrooms in an apartment. So that's where we were. And it's like, okay, I was ready to put that tape line that you joke about when you're like angry. It's like, don't cross this tape line. This is my space. Yes, you'll die if you come over here. And my mom she pulled me aside and she says, you cannot first off put a tape line or build a wall of sheets or do any of that. Because man, my engineering mind, I had an entire fortress.
A castle.
I was ready. And
a moat.
Yeah, I did. I would be like, I have attack vectors. I'm like, I'm ready to take this out. And she said, you need to learn how to adapt to your sister.
Sure.
She's like, every person out there is definitely not going to be like you. I think she emphasized the definitely part as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point that you make, because in business too, it's the same thing, right? So you have good clients and bad clients.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want to stay in business, you have to learn how to address things. I just had this situation today with a client who, we have a standard procedure of doing things, and he wanted to do it differently. And he was giving my staff a hard time, and he's like, no, I like this. I don't want to do it. I want to do it this way. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna pick up the phone call, make a call. And I'm just like, hey man, I've been in business for 19 years. This is how we do it.
We have to do it this way.
Yeah. And like, this is not negotiable. So either you let us do it the way it's supposed to be done, or we're not the right people for you. And he's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But the lawyer in him just wanted to argue with me.
Oh, I gotta tweak it. And that's really what it becomes about. It's not only the adaptability with the people you deal with, it's with the technology you're dealing with.
For sure.
And even as time has happened, that data has moved into the cloud, I've actually adapted my procedures and what I'm doing because I have to incorporate the cloud and consent and all of those things. I didn't have to do that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Cloud was still around. It just wasn't popular. So regular people didn't use it.
Yep. You got to adapt or die. Sorry, people.
I should have ended the chapter that way. Adapt or die, people. I'm dropping the mic right there.
There you go.
I'm done.
Walk away. It would be like a three word chapter.
Yep. Adapt or die, people.
Done.
So I'm going to have to do that in my career. I'm waiting for the moment I can finish a presentation and drop the mic and be like, I'm out.
And just walk out. Yeah. I would like to see that.
Yeah, it will be good.
Yeah, I mean, these are nuggets, and these are things to realize, whether you're a new investigator, you're just getting into it, or you're in school right now and you're studying, you're reading that book as part of your curriculum, or maybe you've been in business for a bunch of years and you're like, you know what, how do I get better at at processes and doing things. How do I take
Right.
that step to the next level, as an investigator or as a business owner? Like these are good nuggets and things you can apply to many different processes.
I definitely like to point out in the chapter, obviously I'm a digital forensic investigator first, but I do OSINT investigations as well. And I think a lot more OSINTers are going to need to learn digital forensic practices and vice versa. The digital forensic investigators are going to need to learn that OSINT side, because you can't get a 360-degree perspective on the person you're investigating or what you're doing unless you really take both perspectives and both different investigative techniques. I think we have to adjust our skill sets. And a lot of people are like, oh, girl, I don't think so. That's a hard no. I'm like, if you don't, you're not going to have much business left.
Yeah,
Because that's what makes you make it through the changes in privacy policies and everything else.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's almost like you have to have this combination of hard skills and soft skills, right? So,
Absolutely.
if you're talking about surveillance, being able to do a pre-surveillance workup, right? You're going to need the OSINT. You're going to need the
Absolutely.
databases and that research for better success. And part of the challenge is convincing your client that, hey, you need to pay for this before we do this, because you want a better chance of having the right outcome, right? If I know
Right.
a pattern of where my target is going, I'll be successful if I lose that person, or, if I have a good sense of who this person is and what their background is. Like, set me up for a win. Don't set me up for a failure. Spend the extra money and do things the right way, right? That's always
Yeah.
one of the
You
challenges.
have to invest in your investigation, which I know sounds silly, but that's from a client's perspective, that they really have to do that. But at the same time, an investigator needs to invest in that investigative skills, expand into the additional skill sets, increase your number of technology pieces you're using, whatever it may be, continued education for your staff, for yourself, all of that. And not just in technical pieces, but also in understanding people, understanding the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways you can adapt.
I know it was a great chapter for me. I was like, oh, I know how to do this. This is
this
all
is
my,
easy.
this is my whole career. I have totally done this.
It
So
really
yeah.
is. It really is. And it's been amazing. I haven't quite known you 25 years, but I've known you for a
A
couple
long time. Yeah.
yeah, a couple of those years. And I'm always a big fan and just amazed of how you just push forward in the industry and are always on the forefront of things. And it's like, when it comes to that digital forensics, like, it's Paraben or nobody, like that's how you do it. And that's my mic drop for you.
Oh, and I appreciate that, because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people, they look at smaller companies, because I actually purposely have kept my company small. I had it much larger at one time, and I realized I spent more of my time managing people than actually innovating technology. So
It's
I
true.
changed my size.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, oh, if you're not the biggest company on the block, you obviously can't offer anything. And I'm like, no, true innovation happens in the small businesses. It
Yeah.
happens with all the investigators out there that are running small businesses. That's what spurs change and the adaptability of an entire industry. It doesn't happen at the top. It happens right in that middle, that sweet
Sure.
spot.
Yeah, those bigger companies, they end up being like the Ford assembly line. Everybody's got their,
Yep. There's no customization, there's no
got our
listening
widgets.
to you, and there's
Yeah.
no adapting to what is actually changing right now.
And that serves a good purpose for certain things, but there are certain things especially in the investigative field, where you have to have that ability to pivot, right? And that's a really important thing.
Yep. Absolutely.
So Amber, we're gonna wind down here. Thank you so much for jumping on. You're always such an easy interview. So thank you.
It is nice. I love doing this. So I'm happy to support the book and happy to support
Yeah.
you and all of your adventures.
Yeah. Yeah. And if folks, like, get a copy of that book, especially if you're new to the industry. There's so many things that you don't even realize when you're getting into it that you need to do to position yourself to be successful. And every author of this book is a success. They've gotten to a point in their career where they've made it, and now they're sharing this knowledge with you. So it's The Art of Investigation. Definitely go out and pick up a copy of it. There'll be links in the show notes. Amber, I'm going to give you the mic drop moment here if you want to.
Well, my mic drop for the book is also network with the authors. Reach out to us. We chose to participate in this project to enhance an industry. So follow us, reach out to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we're going to move on to the next segment.
After 4 years of development, Scope Now is proud to announce the release of Grid. Grid combines OSINT with real-time physical data to achieve new levels of intelligence gathering. Grid supports over 50 data types and hundreds of thousands of sources. Upgrade your OSINT capabilities with Grid and elevate your intelligence team today at scopenow.com. Check out the PI Institute of Education at piinstitute.com. Since 1989, Kelly Riddle has been teaching on subjects such as surveillance, nursing home investigations, insurance fraud, domestic investigations, hidden assets, and accident scene investigations. The PI Institute of Education is a featured learning partner in the investigatorstoolbox.com. So check out the free content on the site, then visit the Institute for more great savings on additional classes. That was a great segment. Thank you, Amber, for sharing your knowledge. Next up is Janet McHard. She took an unconventional route to become a successful investigative professional. Here's Janet and Matt.
And welcome everyone to the next segment of PI Perspectives. We are looking at the Art of Investigation, Volume 2. Today we have our next author. There are several authors actually that wrote chapters in the book that was put together by Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman. We're going through a series here talking to some of the different authors and what they wrote about. Today we have Janet McHard. And Janet, I want to welcome you to the program. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. We were chatting a little bit beforehand. I got to know you a little bit better and learn a little bit about what you do and what you're about. And you took a different route to getting into doing what we do here. So why don't you tell folks who don't know who you are, your story and how you got into the business?
Sure. So I certainly took a different route. I have a master's degree in business, but the bachelor's degree is actually in arts. I have a Bachelor of Arts in dance. I was a professional dancer before, in my previous life, we'll just say it that way.
Right.
And then I got into, I learned about the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. I'm a CFE.
Mhm.
I'm also a CPA, but the CPA was sort of accidental because what I wanted to do was to be a fraud examiner, and the quickest way to get there was to become a CPA. So I tell people that the CPA is sort of accidental.
Sure.
And my goal through all of it was really to become a white-collar crime investigator. That's what I wanted to do. That's where my passion was. And in a lot of ways, I think my arts background really helps me in investigations because I tend to think about things in a nonlinear way,
Sure.
Which can be really confusing to my colleagues, but I think it works really well for me.
A CPA who doesn't think.
Yeah, I'm a CPA who is not a linear thinker.
Not linear,
and
yeah,
that's kind of an unusual combination.
Sure, yeah. What about white collar crime attracted you? Why did you settle on that?
So I have always been fascinated by puzzles. And so my chapter in the book is on curiosity. And I think that I think one of the reasons that I gravitated to that chapter when Chelsea offered me the opportunity was that I've always been really curious. And I tell the story in the chapter about my childhood nickname. I'll tell it here too. My family was one, we played a lot of games. We did puzzles. The logo for my firm is a jigsaw puzzle piece. Our tagline is that we find the missing piece. But my childhood nickname was Snoopy Drawers. Okay. I'm not making that up. Snoopy Drawers. That's what my dad called me. Okay. And it was because, so picture the sort of early 70s, mid 70s, and the mom and pop hotels these days would probably be called a Route 66 hotel, not hotel, sorry, motel. These are the like 10 to 20 room family owned motels. That's where my family stayed. And my parents never got reservations. I didn't even know you could. Never got reservations. So there was always this sort of hunt for a hotel. a place to stay. And we'd find the motel room and we'd pull up right in front of the door, and Dad would give us the metal key back when keys were metal and had a little tag on them, drop in any mailbox. And my brother and I would race into the room. And the first thing I did was go through every drawer in the motel room because there might be something interesting.
Maybe. Could be a
Never
body.
was.
I mean, you never know.
Could be a body, could be, who knows?
Right.
But I went through every drawer. And so Dad started calling me Snoopy drawers.
Right.
And the funny thing was that I think he encouraged it. No, I don't think so. I know he encouraged it because he would ask me to report back on what I found. This is my father, the engineer, who just had not much in the way of spontaneity. And for some reason, it just made him, proud that I was that curious about stuff. And so he really encouraged my curiosity. My mother really encouraged my curiosity. She's very much into books and learning. And if I asked her a question, she'd make me go find the answer. She didn't just tell me the answer.
Right. Right.
So I think I was sort of predisposed to investigations, but I'd never considered it until I read about white collar crime investigation with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And I had a degree in dance, which was never going to pay a mortgage. And I was trying to figure out what to do to actually make a living. And I realized that this was something that could potentially be really fun. And I was at the time I learned about the ACFE, I was in my very first accounting course in college, and I was loving the symmetry of accounting, which really appealed to me. And the combination of the two just made a great deal of sense to me. And at the time, this was in the mid-90s, there weren't forensic accounting programs at colleges, and this was not a career path that was published.
So pre-Enron. Right?
This was pre-Enron. This was, very much so. And so it was, I think one of the things that was interesting about it was that I had a lot of people who said, you're never going to do this for a living, especially I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's where I envisioned that I would be in practice. These days I practice nationwide, but at the time it was really geographically limited. And I had so many people who said, you'll just never have enough work to do this full time. You'll have to do tax preparation or audits or something in the traditional accounting world too. And I ignored them because in addition to being curious, I'm also stubborn.
It's another good trait. Is there a chapter on stubbornness?
I don't remember if there's a chapter on stubbornness, but maybe there should be, because I think it's a really great soft skill for investigators.
There you go, right? Volume 3.
Volume 3, yes. We're giving chapters for volume 3 now.
There you go.
So I really think that I was predisposed to doing investigations simply because I'm a really curious person by nature. And then it was really fostered in me from my parents. So I think that's how I ended up here where I am. And I don't even remember your question, but I'm sure I've over answered it or completely sideswiped it.
Yeah, no, it's just getting into the whole why you chose white collar and all that. And I think that's you've covered it.
It's possible that it chose me. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that curiosity, I think we all have it. Everybody that's in this field has some sort of curiosity or just that determination to try and figure out why something happened, right? And maybe we're children of good books, the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew.
Yeah. I read both Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. Yeah,
me too. I went both ways, right? And to me, if there was investigations, if there problem solving in there, like that was something that I was drawn to, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's in the I guess the times of when we were growing up, like there wasn't as much social media, there wasn't as much as these computer screens in front of you that are distracting you. You had to make your own creativity, you had to make your own reasoning and asking questions and just trying to figure things out. And it's like if you wanted to figure out why something was the way it was, you had to really take some steps to figure it out. So I think that a certain generation naturally is curious. And I think you have to balance it though, right? Because you could have the tendency to be over curious and step away from the scope of the assignment, the task of what you're trying to do. And I think, a good investigator can balance that out and say, okay, when do I when do I tap out here where I've done enough and don't keep going down the rabbit hole, which is a term we all like to use, right?
Right. Well, in fact, I use it in this chapter because one of the things that I talk about in the chapter is, high curiosity and high experience, very experienced person. That combination is kind of the ideal combination.
Mhm.
If you've got somebody who has, like I was early in my career, high curiosity, but not very high experience, you end up with looking at way too many things. You can't hone in on the important clues that you find, and it becomes overly broad.
Sure.
And I admit, when I was early in this career, I didn't know what clues I needed to follow. I didn't know which documents I should seize. I didn't know because it was, this was, yes, I was curious. These were interesting items. They might or might not be relevant. And only later was I able to figure out, okay, I need to figure out what my actual scope of this investigation really is and
Right.
stay within that scope. And as an outside consultant here in my firm, we're licensed private investigators as well as being a CPA firm.
Right.
Within the firm, because we're outside paid experts, we have contracts for each of these cases, separate contracts for each case that we go into. And sort of as a practice tip, one of the things that's been really important is establishing early on, what exactly are we looking at? What's the goal here? And once we know what the goal is, and the goal can be very different.
Yeah.
What the goal is and what jurisdiction, what statutes are we operating under? Because then the statutes can say, here are the elements of the crime that might or might not exist.
Yeah.
And it gives us a chance to narrow the scope of what we're doing and be more efficient in our work. And so being highly curious and yet highly experienced allows me to figure out how that balance happens to scope an engagement.
Yeah, it's interesting you're making that point because I think one thing that everybody needs to realize is that as curious as you are is the person who hired you, right? So they're trying to answer that question as well, right? And what's super important is that expectation of what the service that's going to be performed,
right?
And the methodology of how it's going to be performed, what's going to be done. Like you got to lay all that out in the beginning.
Yes, you do.
Because if you don't, like they could go down the rabbit hole too. And I think one of the worst things, and I'm sure you come across this too, right? You have a client that hires you, but then also starts like they're doing the work also. Oh, I found this, I found that. Did you look over here? Look what I found when I did this. And it's like, stop, buddy. Like
I know.
You're making it worse. Please trust the process. Like let us do our work.
Well, and usually it's because oftentimes, I won't say usually, oftentimes it's well-intentioned,
right.
But sometimes it's because they want to work faster than is reasonable within the engagement. They want the answer sooner and they think they're being helpful. Well, they're oftentimes actually making things worse.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's always a challenge in dealing with a client like that. And, letting them understand that, hey, in order for us to really get the correct answer, we got to cross this off. We got to go to this. We got to rule this out. Like it's got to be definitive. You can't just work on hunches,
right,
or anything like that. I mean, it's a good place to start, right? It could happen this way. I think this may be the case, but then you go and you rule things out and you kind of go through the motions on there. So, what if there was one thing that the reader of your chapter could walk away from after reading and say, okay, I was able to glean this from this particular chapter? What would that one thing be that you'd want someone to walk away from?
I think it's to not be afraid of being curious. There's at least in American culture, I think there's a construct that curiosity is for children.
Right.
And I think that that's inappropriate. I think that curiosity is for all of us. And I think as professionals doing investigations, doing white collar crime examinations, curiosity can very much be, at the very least, your friend. But it's an important tool to keep in your toolkit. And as somebody who's been in this career for several decades now, saying that I'm curious, I sometimes get this look like, curious? That's kind of an odd thing to say, Janet.
Right.
But it's true because curiosity allows me to approach every case with fresh eyes. And it gives me the freedom to wander down the occasional rabbit hole, which with my experience And with the well-honed intuition I have, which is another thing I hope they take from it,
Yeah.
and I'll talk about that in a second. But with my experience, I know which rabbit holes to go down, and I know when to stop going down them. But, you know, as a professional standard, as a CFE, I have an obligation to look at both inculpatory and exculpatory evidence. I need to look at both sides. Could this prove guilt or could this disprove guilt?
Sure.
And I think that's really important to every investigator. Frankly, our clients don't always want to hear the exculpatory stuff,
Yeah.
but we have a professional obligation to look at it. And so being able to like harness that curiosity is and being willing to harness that curiosity allows us to look for both inculpatory and exculpatory information.
Right.
And then the comment about intuition, I'm kind of a brain science geek, which is maybe helpful, maybe not, but I'm kind of a brain science geek. We consciously only process a very, very small percentage of the information data that comes to us through our five senses.
Mhm.
And our non-conscious brain processes the majority of the information that is perceived by those five senses in every second that we're awake. It's like 11 million bits of information per second that come in through the five senses. But we can only consciously process something like 50 bits per second.
Right.
So the vast quantity of data that comes into our world is actually processed by our non-conscious mind. Some researchers call it subconscious. I'll use those. I'll use those as synonyms, even though researchers would argue with me.
Yeah. I mean,
And
that's
you
the whole argument for hypnosis and using that as an investigative technique is based upon that theory, right? You hear that.
It is based upon that theory. Now we're going to get into a whole bunch of other issues
not
about
open that
whether or
rabbit
not
hole.
that can implant memories and all that stuff. But
Not enough time there, Janet.
right, but yeah, that's a different interview.
Right.
But intuition is, in my experience, if you listen to that voice of intuition, what you're doing is you're allowing your non-conscious mind to communicate to you information that it's processed, but it didn't get processed consciously.
Right.
Now, you have to be a little bit careful because intuition can also bring in our unwelcome guest confirmation bias.
Mhm.
And so intuition is good, and I want you to listen to intuition as an investigator, and I listen to intuition. But you've always got to then go back to curiosity, because curiosity is how you combat bias. Being curious and saying, wait, why? How come this person might have done this?
Right.
Going back to journalism uses them all the time. What, why, where, how?
Right.
And then, like, is there something that I'm missing? That's the curious question. And I'm listening to my intuition, and I'm looking consciously for both exculpatory and inculpatory information, and it balances it out. And it brings, particularly if you bring in a trusted colleague who can help you say, well, Janet, I think you're missing this logical element here, or what do you have that addresses this particular element of the statute? I think that if you've got that kind of relationship where you can bring that in and get that trusted colleague to help you, it really goes a long way in using curiosity to come up with a much more solid set of conclusions based on available evidence.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we're all fact finders. What we want is facts that are supportable by either documentary or some other kind of evidence that is contemporaneous. That's really what we're looking for.
Yeah. No, you definitely want to support a thesis and have the information to back it up. I think something you said earlier too is important as well, is having a fresh set of eyes on things, making sure that there's, a peer, somebody trusted, a coworker, a partner in business, hey, you mind taking a look at this? This is what I think, but, maybe in your experience and your own curiosity of how you would approach this would see things a little bit differently. I think the investigators that are successful understand that and will tap into resources as needed, right?
Well, and I also find, and yes, I completely agree with everything you just said. Adding on to that, because of the nonlinear brain that I have, I frequently will drag my entire office into the conference room, and I have a whiteboard in there, and I list and I sort of in real shorthand with a lot of arrows and different colors, here's the elements of what we're looking at. Here's what we've tested. Here's what we haven't tested. We have evidence here. We don't have evidence here. And it just all goes up on the whiteboard. And it makes it really obvious to everyone in the room, oh, wait, here's the missing piece. And I don't know if you've ever seen it. I think it's a Far Side cartoon from 2 or 3 decades ago. Where
now you're really dating yourself.
As if the gray hair didn't.
If the motel didn't do it.
Right. If the motel didn't do it. I already admitted I was a kid in the early 70s. They can do math.
Right.
But there's a Far Side cartoon, I think it's Far Side, and it's a professor and a student, and there's a blackboard and this really detailed like calculation, and the answers in the lower right corner, and in the middle it says, poof, a miracle occurred. Well, as investigators, we can't let a miracle occur. We have to have the logical progression all the way to our conclusions.
Oh, it's all science, and numbers are always science. You can't dance around them, right?
Okay, well, that's yet another podcast.
There we go.
So I was a research assistant in my master's program, and one of the things that my professor said was that accounting is really an agreed upon fiction. Yeah. We all agree to these definitions, and because we've agreed to these definitions, that's what they mean. Yeah. But fraud happens when we don't agree, when somebody decides that it's going to be defined a different way. Yeah. And as a white collar investigator, I'm looking for people who are using accounting terms, but defining them differently.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole concept of the blockchain, right? And all the computers agree that these numbers sequence and line up the way they're supposed to line up.
And if they don't, then we've got a problem.
That's another
What the problem is, we don't know, but we've got a problem.
Yeah. So we're running out of time in this segment, Janet, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this and giving us just a little bit of background as to who you are and the insight and your thoughts to going into writing this amazing chapter and this amazing book. I think, that you made a comment very early on here too about soft skills, that we don't focus enough on that. And that's true. And I think only within the last 7 or 8 years, maybe, that there's been that shift where there's a lot of content online and a lot of material to now focus on this. But it used to be the soft skills were things that you kept them to yourself. It was hold it close to your vest and don't share that special way of doing things. But I think there's there's been a shift in people's willingness to talk about this stuff. So I appreciate you volunteering to be a part of this project here and putting down some good material. So it's The Art of Investigation. The author's head author, there's Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman. I encourage folks to go check it out. There's in the show notes, there's a link to the book and all that. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about your chapter.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everybody sit tight and we'll have another chapter for you before we wrap the show up.
Specializing in the research of liability for personal injury claims, Pacific Liability Research offers insurance assessments of all applicable liability coverages to help determine what a case is potentially worth. Have a case with no insurance policy? Since 2019, the highly trained staff on their insurance discovery team has located over 100 million plus in previously unknown insurance coverage. They offer a full refund for any inaccurate results, and they do not charge for no-hit searches. Additionally, Investigator's Toolbox members automatically receive 50% off their first case. Just mention Investigator's Toolbox when you fill out your first order. More information can be found at pacificliability.com. Contact them today and discover the immediate impact that Pacific Liability Research can provide. Satellite Investigations has launched its new website full of great new content. Matt and his team have released some great, informative blogs. Make sure you log into LinkedIn and follow Satellite Investigations for the latest content. We're in the home stretch. This episode has been packed with some great info. Next up, we have pink-collar crime expert Kelly Paxton. Kelly is no stranger to broadcasting, and she hosts a great podcast called Fraudish. Let's welcome Kelly Paxton and Matt Spaier.
And welcome to the next segment of PI Perspectives. We are looking into The Art of Investigation, Volume 2. We've got a series here where we're interviewing a bunch of the authors. This is a book that was put together by Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman. For this segment, we're talking to Kelly Paxton. Kelly and I have known each other for a while. She's a fellow podcaster. She does an amazing podcast called Fraudish. And Kelly, I want to welcome you to the program.
Thank you. That means a lot to me that you like my podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, I feel like we're veterans, man. There's so many people like around COVID started getting into doing the whole podcasting thing, and there's so much content out there. And now it's a ghost land. There's not too
It
much
is.
left.
If you make it past 7 episodes, they say you're golden. And I'm at like 130, 140, and you're over 250. So we're both golden.
Yeah, and we're still behind Jerry Williams.
I know. We'll never catch up.
Yep. It's awesome to have you on here, really.
Thank you.
And I've followed you over the years, and even when you first started podcasting, we had several conversations of how do you do this, how do you get into it, what's the right equipment. I have something to say, and you definitely have something to say, and it's your nature, right? You're a teacher. Even though your background is fraud investigations, CFE, and being a part of all that stuff, I think your heart is training people and teaching people how to do neat stuff, right?
Well, you know what? I had a boss who said, as an investigator, you're whack-a-mole. You hit one, another one pops up. But when you teach, when you go in front of a big group, you're affecting hundreds of people. And that sort of, mushroom effect is awesome. It's really, really awesome. So getting the word out, because I kind of joke that fraud is like porn. People want to search it surreptitiously, but they need to know about it. So This is why I love the teaching.
Yeah, no, it's great. You've been on the circuit now. Post-COVID, conferences are taking place and people are going out, whether it be virtual or in person. I prefer the in-person thing. That's just me. I'm sure you're probably the same way. Nothing does it like just going to a location and investing 2 or 3 days and getting better at your craft and doing what you're doing. So folks who don't know who you are and your background, just tell me a little bit about how you got into the business and how you got to where you're at today.
Long story short, I was in the financial industry. I was a stockbroker and a bond trader. We had a client who was hinky. He ended up getting arrested. I called the special agent. I became a U.S. Customs special agent. And I arrested typical bad guys. Then my husband got a job in the middle of the country with no border. So I took a bit of a break. Then I started doing backgrounds for OPM. I eventually went to a sheriff's office and I got my CFE. And I started being the analyst for embezzlement cases. And all my suspects were women, except for one man who stole like a woman. Right. And they do steal differently. And that started me out on pink collar crime. But it's position, not gender. Women are just really, really good at it. So I did that. I loved doing criminal defense work because it's so important when your liberty is at risk. So I really enjoyed that. And then I had a brief detour to a big shoe company. And then I'm back on my own. And actually, this is, I think, the best work I've ever done is the teaching and training.
Yeah.
So people refer to me as Pink. They know me as Pink Collar Crime. I show up on stage in a pink suit. That's what they know me for. But you know what? At the base of fraud, it's humans. So I'm really fascinated by when a good person makes a bad choice. Yeah. And so I'm very involved in behavioral science, behavioral economics, because when I was a special agent, I saw your typical bad guy. And then when I become a fraud analyst, I see people that look like you and me. Yeah. And your brain just, I grew up I didn't know anyone who went to prison. And so it changed. So we have these biases that criminals are icky people. They're not. They just aren't. So that the human nature of it all is truly what fascinates me.
Yeah, I think when you start talking about financial crimes and the reason that financial crimes are committed, there's always a backstory. There's always a reason. I think there's a lot of people that do this stuff out of desperation, that they're not necessarily, an evil, muhaha type of person. It's along the lines of, I got to do what I got to do to make sure, my family's looked after. You get a little bit of that, then you get a little bit of the greed, where they just get that taste and it's an addiction. And sometimes I think it's the addiction of actually stealing. It's not the money amount. We've seen that happen. I remember seeing Netflix or HBO out on Long Island. I don't know if you remember the case with the school
Oh yeah.
principal or whatever that was
Bad Education on
Bad
HBO.
Education. Yes, that's it. Yep. Yeah, that was a great statement on personality and just the makeup of I guess some of the individual, right? You talk about the forensic psychology and understanding why somebody thinks the way they do. And your chapter is empathy. And I think that segues real nice into the behavior of that. So tell me a little bit about how you approached the chapter and what you were trying to say with the material.
I will admit that when I was a young federal agent, I was a little, we call it badge heavy, and it never got me anywhere, never, except in trouble. No. Over the years, granted, my focus has changed in investigations, but over the years, I've seen people that look like us sitting across the table, and it's going to be one of their worst days ever. Yet, you can see their relief when they confess, and they do confess. Now, I'm excluding psychopaths and sociopaths, but the quote, good people who have made a wrong decision and it's snowballed into something really horrific. When I sit across the table from them, what's the saying? There go for the grace of God, go I, or whatever. I never have had to make that decision, knock on wood, to do that. But I've met people who, I'd go out for happy hour. I'd go out for lunch with, and it's their worst day. There's a woman I show in one of my slides. She's 87. Her husband got cancer and she stole $27,000. Am I going to sit across the table and just berate her? No. What happens when I'm 87? If I even live to 87, we need to be empathetic. And so a huge part of my chapter on empathy is also the diversity of experiences. And, as you age and as you mature, you get more and more experiences. And we need to be able to put ourselves in their feet, so to speak. And when Chelsea and Bruce reached out to me, they gave the list of chapters, and I immediately went to empathy. Because I've also seen, we work in fraud, we work in investigations. Some people are like, oh God, you deal with criminals all day long. And it's like, you know what? They're people.
Yeah.
They are people. And we have to remember that they are people. And they've done something that we don't think we would ever do. But we don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you remember Sam Antar of the Crazy Eddie scam?
Crazy Eddie, yeah, of course. Come on, I'm from New York. I mean, it's,
yeah,
in the backyard.
He's
His prices
awesome.
are insane.
Yeah, the prices are insane. He's awesome, but I went to a class where he taught, and I'm sitting next to a CPA CFE, and he has this visceral reaction to him. He's like, "Ugh, I can't believe they would pay him to come here." And I'm like, and Sam is up there saying, you don't know if I'm stealing right now.
Right.
We have to have different experiences in our life. And my CPA CFE friend has led a very straight life. He doesn't understand the different pressures that people feel. And therefore, life is black and white to him. Well, black goes to white and there's gray in between. So that's why I wanted to choose empathy, because and as an investigator, if you don't allow them to spew because you're pounding on the table, you're missing everything.
So you bring up a very interesting point, right? So a lot of times that empathy is going to lead to more threads to pull, right? So when you're trying to develop rapport with somebody, you're socially engineering your interview, and you need to connect with that person. You need to relate with them. If you're badge heavy, there's a less chance that that's going to happen, right? I think if you take the empathetic approach, it's not a guarantee that they're going to spill the beans, but there's a good chance that that connection will be there. I know, very early on in my career, I used to work for my first job out of college. I worked for a company that did pre-employment screenings, mystery shopping, and like threat assessment or that, right? Looking at employees for stealing and things like that. So whenever we had that gotcha moment with one of these people, like we would interview them and we would try and get them to like confess to what they've done. And the standard rule was it was always like a quarter of whatever they admitted to was what they actually took. But, you know, I remember having these conversations like, hey, I know you made a mistake, you know, and just having that low voice and just that comfort level and not being all in their face, you know, hey, you know, and I'm sure you got a lot of stresses and things you weren't thinking straight about it, you know, or you did this and you did that. Don't worry, I did that too. I stole the Smurf stickers from the 5 and dime store when I was in 3rd grade, you know, like I know what you did, right? You know, this and that, and just developing that. And it's such an important tool as a investigator to develop rapport, to have that empathy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a boss with a X 3-letter agency that maybe ends in I. And I did an interview of a young kid, and we're in his office. My boss is standing outside, and we're laughing. The guy showed me a text. It clearly showed he didn't do what he was alleged to have done. And we're in there laughing. So the kid leaves, and my boss looks at me and he goes, I never want laughing in my office. I want tears. And this kid became a source for me.
Yeah.
Would he have ever became a source for, excuse my French, the asshole boss? No.
Probably
No.
not. Yeah.
He would have just spread the rumor that was going around campus that, you know, this group was just like mean.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this kid was like, hey, you know, you might want to check. So you can't do that. It doesn't work in this world. Maybe it worked 50 years ago,
Right.
but it certainly doesn't work today.
Yeah, you know, they used to hit people with phone books too. We don't really do that anymore.
Yeah.
Allegedly. So times have changed. You know, it's a different culture.
And you said something, I have the 2 to 6 rule. So whatever they say they stole, you multiply it between 2 and 6 times. So we're close.
Yeah. That was just they told us that when, you know, the guy admitted to stealing 10 grand. Well, probably 40.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was good, you know. And then like we throw the things too, like, oh man, like they could send you to Rikers for this. Like, you don't want to go to Rikers. Like that's not good. Like, you know, have you ever been to a jail before? Do you know what goes on there? Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But
well, and
connection.
The other thing is like difference as experience. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
How do you pay your water bill?
How do I pay my water bill?
Yeah.
I don't. I have well water.
Okay. Well, if you had a water, if you worked in the city and you had to pay your water bill, how would you pay it? Like mechanically, how would you pay it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's part of your maintenance. So if you're paying your rent or whatever, so you're sending a check. That's what you're looking for, right? It's a direct deposit, to write a check, whatever.
Yeah,
right?
ACH, something like that.
Yeah.
Not everyone does that. And that's where those diversity of experiences. So I have a family relative who, let's just say, lives a little like cash heavy. Mm-hmm. And do I think he pays his water bill via a check from whatever bank? No. Every couple of months he goes in, he pays cash. But you and I as investigators, if we don't know that that world exists of unbanked people or, you know, cash heavy people, we're not going to look for that risk. And when I was at the sheriff's office, one of my first cases was a water district. And the woman was stealing cash payments. And I'm like, who pays? You know, I was younger then. I was like, who pays their water bill via cash? There's this crazy story. I don't know if you know about this, but there is a woman in Florida, and she took the registration fees for, let's call them exotic dancers. Mm-hmm. Do you think they paid in $2 bills, or do you think they paid via like online checking?
Yeah, probably $2 bills.
Yeah, And so this woman was just taking all the cash. But I don't know that world. So how can we investigate a world that we don't know?
Oh, that's a good point.
And there's a lot of risk there. So there's utilities and people, everyone, like I'm going to say 99.9% of investigators out there pay their utilities via check or, you know, auto pay. Mm-hmm. But we're not 99.9% of the population. We have to think differently.
Yeah.
of how other people live. And that also goes to when you're interviewing these people. You can't sit there and say, oh yeah, I went skiing yesterday, it was awesome, to someone who can't even, pay the rent.
Right.
Like, you're not gonna. So if you don't have diverse experiences, you're gonna have a much rougher time.
Yeah. Yeah. And just keeping an open mind, I think, is important as well.
Yeah.
You make a good point too, is, you're talking about understanding the different avenues of paying and all the other stuff, right? Venmo wasn't around 10 years ago. People don't know what that is, or ACH wasn't really that popular, right? It was writing a check, cash, or paying by credit card, right? Those were the main things there. So now you understanding when you're looking at something, considering different avenues to where the fraud could take place, I think is a good point. But it all comes down to when you're interviewing that person, and the book specifically is made to increase your soft skills, right? Every chapter that these things that people are writing about, they're all soft skill things that you need as an investigator. And I don't think there's enough of a focus on that, and that's why I think Chelsea and Bruce actually just wanted to have volume 2, right? Obviously there was a demand after volume 1, it was such a success. Here's volume 2, but those soft skills are really, really important for folks to take away. So if there was one thing that the reader could take away from your chapter, if there was just one thing that they were walking away with from what you wrote there, what would you want that one thing to be?
I want to say, I'm going to kind of absorb the world around you. Be observant. Mm-hmm. And being observant means reading, listening to amazing podcasts like this, traveling. We need to understand that not everyone lives the same as us. And we use that and I'm trying to quickly find this, this quote in here about empathy is that, okay, one of them, Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah, so true. Famous quote. That's a good
one.
Yeah. And she get it. I mean, it's a poet, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is I've always been known good for my soft skills. I can put together a pivot table, I can make a chart, but I'm not great at it. Mm-hmm. What I'm great at is talking to people. I went on a recreational cruise recently, just a day cruise in Mexico. Right. And my friend's Kelly's going to know everyone and all their stories by the end of the day. And you know why? It fascinates me. Sure. It just fascinates me. So if you're just sitting in a room or a cubicle all day long and you're not getting out there and you're not talking to people, I don't think you could be incredibly empathetic. Another interesting thing that I told my son's best friend is he only reads nonfiction. There's been an experiment. The more fiction you read, the more empathetic you are. And you know why? Because it transports you to a different place.
Yeah.
And you put yourself in that place. Mm-hmm. And so my son's friend was like, God, I just thought I'd stop reading fiction once, I got to college. And I was like, dude, you got to read fiction because really good fiction transports you to a different place. I just read Kristen Hanna, her new book called The Women, and it's about the Vietnam War. Tears. And also just, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It transports you and you understand better.
No, it's a good medium. It's a real good point. I recall within, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, having a conversation with my wife about my kids. And, we homeschool our kids. And she was frustrated. She was like, our kids are not creative enough. I feel like, they've got really good analytical skills and all that, but we try to do creative writing and it was a disaster. And we've always had this policy in our household. We don't do television. It's few and far between. And she had this whole thing and it hurt my soul, but I went with it. No Star Wars, right? She's like, I don't want the kids seeing the violence. I don't want them doing this and that. I'm like, but it's Star Wars. Come on. This and that. Right. So I was like, you pick your battles. I was like, okay, fine, no Star Wars, whatever, right? And or we just weren't allowing that type of stuff. And then we were having that conversation about creativity, and she started talking to some other homeschool parents, right? What do you do, for this and that? And then like, do you let them watch like Star Wars and stuff like that? Oh yeah, kids are like all in on Star Wars. So like we started doing it. So like Star Wars, Legos, like all this other stuff. And then my kids had played with Legos before, but now like when you combine this fiction, right, with Legos to build and whatever. So like they've created like their own narratives now. And it's really like you notice a huge difference to how creative this individual can become when they're given the tools to be creative. So it's very interesting that you're saying that, and to tie it in with empathy. These are the skills that let you experience the views of somebody else, right? If you don't have that creativity, if you don't have that bandwidth to step in somebody else's shoes and understand why they did what they did, or what's going on with the reasoning behind it, like those are absolutely 100% skill sets you need to do investigative work. It's like creep into the criminal mind, right? You have to be there and not only understand the sinister level of why they did what they did, but having a heart and understanding the motivation behind why they did what they did. It's really, really important, right?
Yeah, there's, because I'm in the speakers world, there's a lot of speakers that kind of specialize in play. Mm-hmm. And, 10 years ago, I would have, I'm not doing a trust fall. Yeah. Oh my God, you get so much out of bruises. Yeah. Like it is fun. And when you do presentations, if you get, I don't do this in mine, but I see speaker friends who do it. You get them up and you get them moving. Yeah. And it does get the juices flowing. So like, sticking someone in the corner of a room, oh yeah, they're close to the door so they can escape. You're taught that Investigator 101, make sure they can escape if they want to. You can't be, trapping them in the room. Right. But like, there's other things that you can get people to relax. And I'm going to say let down their guard, not in a bad way, but I've had people confess to me, and you do see them like they are relieved. Yeah. They just are.
Yeah, I think so. That's the human mind, that burden. And it's that, I mean, Freud's got a whole opinion on that for sure. Just being able to get all that out there and release yourself of these burdens. I think it's a real deal. And you see it. You see people's body language, that, I got to tell somebody. I think that's just the human nature, but again, tying it into a skill set as an investigator to pull that out, and just have that round of ammunition in what your end goal is to get that accomplished. I think is really, really, really important.
And you have to be honest with these people. Yeah. Like, you can't fake curiosity. No, you just can't. And when my dad,
that was someone else's chapter. You can't talk about curiosity.
Oh yeah, okay, but like it has to be honest.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Like you really have to. I think in my podcast, when I say what makes a great investigator, curiosity comes up all the time.
Oh yeah, 100%.
All the time.
Yeah.
So I want to know how that stripper or exotic dancer, lives. Like right. I want to know. Like it's not my life.
Do people still accept $2 bills?
Well, I jokingly said one time $1 bill, and my husband said, it's $2. I was like, what? How do you even know that? Yeah. God rest his soul. But like, I didn't know. Apparently it's $2 bills. And now it's kind of a joke. Yeah. I collect $2 bills because I think they're lucky. So see, I could sit there and I could go, I collect $2 bills. Like you got to have something that they're going to connect with. Yeah. And empathy, I think, is everyone wants to feel good. Behavioral science, behavioral economics. At the end of the day, we want to look in the mirror and see a good person. And if you're going to berate someone, they're not going to feel good about themselves. And they won't give you what you need. Like I've gotten people to download their bank accounts instead of waiting months to get them from, the bank. Like, because I'm nice. Shockingly, I am nice.
It's not the Jedi mind trick. getting back to Star Wars. That's not real.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely not. So
that's
I
great.
was honored to be able to do empathy, but
Yeah.
30 years ago, I would not have picked empathy.
Yeah, no, it's, and these are the skill set that you learn over the years. And this is why it's so important that folks like yourself and the other authors have made themselves available to share this knowledge with the future, the future investigators that, this book is it's a textbook for college. People are going to be required to read it and kind of learn how to use these skill sets. So it's super important. We're going to wind down over here. But before we do, I want to make sure we talk about your book. You did more than a chapter. You've actually got a book out. So that's How to Prevent, Detect, and Investigate Pink Collar Crime, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So if you're interested in learning more about what Kelly's about, definitely read that book. And she is a teacher. That's her specialty, her background and passion. And make sure you check out her podcast, Fraudish, as well. It's definitely still in my library of my go-tos. So kudos to you, and keep putting the good content out there. And then lastly, please get Art of the Investigation, or Art of Investigation, Volume 2. Dr. Chelsea Binns and Bruce Sackman. There's a link in the show notes to get the book. So you definitely want to check it out. So Kelly, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. This is an honor and a pleasure.
Great. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys on the next show. Take care.
Thanks for checking out the show. Please make sure you follow PI Perspectives on YouTube. What a great amount of knowledge that was just shared. Make sure you pick up a copy of The Art of Investigation Revisited. The link's in the show notes. We want to also thank Campbell Insurance Group for sponsoring the show. Remember to tell them you listen to save $50 when you apply for insurance. Additional thanks to Scope Now, Pacific Liability Research, and the PI Institute for Education. Also, don't forget about investigatorstoolbox.com, where you can save $50 when you type in the code Perspectives50. Join up now. And also follow Matt at Satellite Investigations on LinkedIn. And if you have a question or a comment about the show, email Matt at matthews@satellitepi.com. You can also find him on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. We'd like your feedback to bring you the best shows possible, and we'll be back next week with a new show. So make sure you tune in. Stay safe out there. Have a great week.